Alhamdulillah, all praise be to Allah, and may the peace and blessings and mercy of Allah be upon His Prophet Muhammad. Welcome to the next episode of Reflections on Ramadan. In the first two episodes, we covered using Ramadan as a catalyst for change. And as was mentioned in the hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, that the day that one of you fasts should not be like the day in which you don't fast. In other words, there needs to be a clear difference between the day when we fast and the day we don't fast, in terms of our attitude, our behavior, our worship, our awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so in these next few episodes, we'd like to cover what are some of the wisdoms, benefits, and virtues behind fasting. I have with me again Sheikh Isa Al-Asha, Abu Ahmed. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
So one of the ways we can begin with this topic is looking at one of the names of Allah, which is Al-Hakim, which means the most wise or the all-wise. This word in Arabic actually comes from the same root as hikmah, wisdom, as well as hukm, which is ruling. So Allah obviously is the source of all rulings, and of course His rulings are all-wise, and whether we know it or not, there is always a wisdom behind His rulings. Some of it we may know, some of it we may not know or understand. For the case of fasting, as an example, it's very clearly specified, one of the wisdoms behind it, in Surah Al-Baqarah, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. O you who believe, fasting has been prescribed upon you, as it has been prescribed upon those that came before you, so that you may achieve taqwa. And we'll talk a bit more about what taqwa means and what it encompasses, but basically it's normally translated as piety or consciousness of Allah, yes. Meaning that one performs what Allah has commanded him, as well as refraining from what Allah has told him to refrain from.
Yes.
So Abu Ahmed, can you talk a bit about what scholars have said about the wisdom behind fasting in Ramadan?
Jazakallah khairan. Again, I'm happy to be here to join you with this halaqah, with this episode. All the praise to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and peace and blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon His last messenger. The word hikmah or wisdom in Arabic, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned this in the Quran. يُؤْتِ الْحِكْمَةَ مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَمَنْ يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. Definitely all the worshipping that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed on mankind, especially the Muslims, is wisdom. That's something that the Muslim should notice and believe in it. And the Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned that al-hikmah in the Quran means the sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So wherever we see this hikmah, we should know that it's the Quran and the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sunnah and the teachings of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Definitely, as you know, the wisdoms of the whole actually mankind creation, there is a wisdom behind it, which is basically Allah described this in the Quran. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. All the creation has been created to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Mankind and jinn were created to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as Muslims, we have pillars of Islam like Salah, Zakah, Siyam, fasting, Hajj, and so forth. If you look at each one of these pillars of Islam, you will find many wisdoms behind it. Like Salah, it will connect you always daily 5 times with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Fasting has its own special things. It will refrain you from haram. As the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, الصوم جنة فإذا كان صوم أحدكم فلا يرفث ولا يصخب فإن سابه أحد أو قاتله فليقل إني صائم. The Prophet ﷺ said in the authentic hadith, which is narrated by Bukhari, the fasting is a shield that protects you from falling into false thing, for bad things, like backbiting, lying, and so forth. So we can just look at this by itself, refrain you from haram, from sins. That's why it's also a good thing to fast. It's always recommended, even voluntarily. You look at zakah, for instance, as a worship. Zakah integrate the community, the Muslim community. It will put the rich people, look at the poor people, help them out to have at least the minimum things in this life. So it will integrate the community. The community will be more coherence. If you look at the Hajj, look at Arafah, when the people stand in Arafah and they supplicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will see all of them all like the same. There is no difference between the black and white. There is no difference between rich and poor, and so forth. So these are ibadat, we can derive from them some wisdoms, some benefits, some virtues. But sometimes we cannot even comprehend what is basically the hikmah or the wisdom behind such worshipping. But as Muslims, we have to also, we have to always believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the all wisdom. He has the whole hikmah and prescribing all these worshipping forms upon us. Other things we can talk about is that siyam or fasting refrains or controls our desires. Look at maybe the youth. Usually they have more energy, more desires, more actions. They like to do things fast and so forth. Whether it's eating or whether it's other things. Desires can be refrained, can be controlled. The Prophet said in the authentic hadith, again, I will mention the hadith in Arabic, يا معشر الشباب من استطاع منكم الباءة فليتزوج فمن لم يستطع فعليه بالصوم فإنه له وجاء. All the young Muslims, all youth of Muslims, try to marry, get married if you can. But if you cannot, what do? The Prophet direct them to fast so that they will control their behavior, their desires. Because if you leave the young men without marriage, and they are capable of it, and they are full of energy and full of desires, and without controlling it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically directing the Muslims how to stop or control and even narrow the passages of our veins against the shaitan or the Satan, which actually the Prophet described him that he's running in our veins, like the blood runs in our bodies. The Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ يَجْرِي مِنْ ابْنِ آدَمَ مَجْرَى الدَّمِ. The Satan basically runs in our veins like a blood runs in the bodies. So that when we fast, it's all known scientifically even, when you fast, the blood vessels get narrow, so that he cannot run and tempt people or trap them or deceive them into falsehood or bad things or committing sins and so forth. And that's maybe the hikmah of siyam also, that we can easily derive and understand.
And so the hadith says it's wija, like a shield, or?
Yeah, wija basically is like a shield or a protection,
yes,
from falling into these desires and falling into major sins in Islam. Another thing is you can look at in fasting that it's a form of thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, gratitude for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran about Dawood, أَعْمَلُوا آلَ دَاوُودَ شُكْرًا. What is shukra here? Means the form of worship, obeying Allah, supplicating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fulfilling His commandments and so forth. That's what it all means. Standing in the night and making dua and doing the night prayers, doing the volunteer prayers, doing the charity and so forth. These are some of the things that we can talk about. I will maybe mention one thing, which is Ramadan will help you, just this is from myself, is that it helps you get rid of the bad habits. And if you also learn a good habit, like worshipping, some people start fasting. Now if you fast Ramadan, when Ramadan ends, after Eid, you start doing your 6 of Shawwal. They are very easy usually, because now already your body has used to fast.
Used to it and
accustomed to it. And if you continue fasting other days, like Monday and Thursday, and the
3 days of the full moon.
Yes, the 3 days of the full moon, they also become easy. They are not difficult anymore. But if you stop fasting after Eid, then you want to come to Ramadan, you will find it a little bit hard. Now, but if you train yourself, we are human beings, we get trained, and the habits need like 3 to 4 weeks to get accustomed to it. And the last thing I would maybe mention here in this episode is that we feel compassionate and empathy to our own community, to our own people who are misfortunate in this life, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descends the rizq upon the people. Some of us are lucky, some of us like rich, some of us are poor. So we feel as a full community and we feel compassionate, and we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it, because as in the hadith Abu Hurairah said, انظروا إلى من هو أسفل منكم فإنه أجدر أن لا تزدروا نعمة الله عليكم. Look at the people who are under you or below or are misfortunate. I mean, if you look high, for the people who are fortunate and rich and so forth, they have all the things that they like, you feel bad. But if you look at the people who are misfortunate, you will appreciate the mercy and the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon you. وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصَاهَا. The bounties of Allah upon mankind is abundant.
And I think by nature, people are more inclined to donate and be charitable and care for others during Ramadan, especially as it was enjoined as the example of the Prophet ﷺ.
In the authentic hadith of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, narrated by Bukhari, he describes the Prophet ﷺ that he was so generous, and he was generous mostly in Ramadan. The most generous in Ramadan.
Yes.
So, and this is maybe should be an example for all Muslims. The Prophet ﷺ is our role model. He's the one we should follow, his steps. We should follow his way of life. And if he was generous mostly in Ramadan, we should also do that. Because remember, the rewards, again, in Ramadan, up to 700 times.
Yes.
And we search for the poor Muslims, look around, help others. Even a small thing, but you never know or say the good things, because you never know what you say or what you do, how much the reward is in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yes, and this actually leads us to a very important hadith, which is the next topic of our discussion, which is the hadith al-Qudsi, in which Allah said, قال الله كل عمل بني آدم له إلا الصوم فإنه لي وأنا أجزي به. That all of humankind's deeds are for him or for them, except for fasting. It is for me, and I'm the one who rewards for it. And in fact, in another hadith, it's mentioned that all of the deeds of humankind are multiplied in reward from 10 to 700 times, except for fasting. For It is for me, for Allah, and Allah is the one that rewards for it. So let's take a look at more details in this hadith and what's the meaning of it, what the scholars have said about it, right after the break. So please stay tuned, and we'll be back, inshallah.
Allah the Most High and Merciful says, invite to the way of your Lord with wisdom and fair preaching. Do you want to join Huda in calling to Allah? Do you want to spread the message like the prophets did? Do you want to share in the blessings and rewards? Why not support Huda towards these noble aims? Why not sponsor a program of your choice? If you would like to help Huda in spreading the correct message of Islam, please send an email to support@huda.tv or call +2 014 327 1771 for more details, or fax +2 023 8555 251.
Welcome back. Just before the break, we were discussing the hadith regarding in which Allah said that fasting is for me, and I am the one who rewards for it. So the question that one might cross one's mind is, obviously, any deed of worship should be for Allah.
Yes.
So the question is, what have the scholars said about the meaning of this, that fasting is for me, and I am the one who rewards for it?
To answer your question, Imam Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, may Allah give him mercy, mentioned about 10 sayings, or he derived like 10 sayings from what the scholars has said. So many different interpretation for this meaning, but could be summarized in like 4 things. The first thing is that siyam or fasting is hidden. Nobody knows about it. You fast and nobody knows that you are fasting. You could hide it. There is no show off on fast and when you fast. So sincerely, it's a sincere work if you keep it between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And fasting, as we talked about earlier, It's not just you fast from food or fast from drinking and so forth, but there are sexual desires, you stop it during the day. And there are, things which is like fasting, your heart is fasting. You become humble, you are easy in dealing with, your manners behave very well, your attitude becomes better and so forth. So fasting will be, distinguished in that person. So showing off is not there. Showing off is not there. The other thing the Imam mentioned, that the reward for fasting is unknown. It's kept for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward the person who is fasting in this dunya. Nobody knows what the reward is. It's unlimited, unknown. So that the reward, when it's unknown, it's people become more anxious to know it. More they have more desire to know it, and they will work harder to get it. That's the nature of mankind. So when it's unknown and there is no show off in it, it has also the essence of a good deed. We mentioned last time the good deed has two essence, two fundamentals. One has to have sincerity, and one is also to follow the sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which we inshallah will talk later in episodes where how the Prophet sallallahu used to fast. There are sunan, the way of fasting of the Prophet sallallahu should be an example for all of us. We follow his step. Now, I will maybe mention one thing very fast. He used to make suhoor, and he will command us to do suhoor, to give us the energy and so forth. Some people will stay so very late and they will maybe eat dinner and then they will wake up for Fajr, and they do not wake up for suhoor. They are leaving small sunnah, but this not should happen. And the third thing he mentioned, the Imam rahimahullah mentioned that dearest, when you say for me, it's you became bringing this to you, it's a dearest thing. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying fasting is dear for him. And Ibn Abdul Barr rahimahullah mentioned that fasting is being distinguished as one of the different, or because it's dearest to Allah, then should be one of the, maybe the best worship or something like this meaning he was mentioning. So the other one is the fourth meaning of this that Imam Ibn Hajar mentioned, it's an honor. When you say Baytullah, you honor the house. The house is made of stone and concrete and block and wood and so forth. But when it becomes a place for worship, it becomes dearest for Allah. The best places on earth are the places of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the dearest or the worst places on earth are the markets and the malls, where unfortunately people are full there and the masajid sometimes are not full. So these are the four meanings that Imam Ibn Hajar mentioned of understanding why the fasting is basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards for it, as in the hadith you just mentioned.
Yes, and also Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen commented on this hadith as well, yes, in one of his books, and mentioned how fasting, the fact that Allah has singled out fasting in this as a form of worship, is that it has a very honored status for Allah,
yes,
that Allah loves it, that by definition there is sincerity, because as you mentioned, that it's something that's hidden, it's a secret,
yes,
between a worshipper and Allah. And that anyone, if they wanted to, they could simply break their fast.
Yeah.
So there's no reason, there's no benefit in fasting unless someone is doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yes, excellent.
And then he mentioned also something that Sufyan ibn Uyayna mentioned. Yes. And that on the day of the resurrection, people will be brought to account, and Allah will take from their deeds to settle their accounts, until there's nothing left from their deeds except for fasting.
Yes.
And then Allah will forgive them and permit them entry into paradise or heaven because of their fasting.
Yes.
So this is a very different status singled out for fasting. The other thing the Shaykh mentioned is the fact that Allah singled out the reward as well,
yes,
the quantity. That in some of the hadith it is mentioned that it's from 10 to 700 times for anything except for fasting, that it's unlimited. It's tied directly to Allah. There's no number associated with it, and that Allah multiplies as He sees fit.
Yes, excellent.
And the Shaykh also mentioned that among the wisdoms behind this is the fact that when you fast, you actually gather three different forms of patience at the same time, or patience or perseverance, sabr. The first one, of course, is sabr in obeying Allah, perseverance and patience in obeying Allah. The other one, patience or perseverance in avoiding what Allah has commanded us to avoid. And the third one is bearing hardship, because sometimes, obviously, someone who's fasting, he may have to suffer some hardship. So that's another form of bearing something. This is the third. So in fact, you gather all three forms of patience in one worship. And then the Shaykh mentioned the ayah in Surah Al-Zumar. إِنَّمَا يُوَفَّى الصَّابِرُونَ أَجْرَهُمْ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. That only those who are patient and persevere will get the reward in full and without limit, a limitless account.
Actually, what Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah said is coincides actually with what many scholars have said. But mashallah, he brought very, very nice meanings, like meaning of patience and so forth. Because if you look at the meaning of siyam, literally, it means restraining from things. What we say in Arabic, habs, mean you stop things and you deprive yourself from things, which is basically, as we know, food and drinking and sexual desires and so forth. You deprive yourself from it. And this is basically patience. And the obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires patience in everything. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as-sabur, His name is as-sabur. If He were to punish all the people who are doing bad sins, if He does not have patience, but He's not a sabur, would it be a different case? That's why patience is a fundamental thing in every worship. Actually, the worshipping itself built in two things, al-shukr wa sabr. The worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala needs two things. When you act, is doing shukr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but even this act will require sabr, requires patience. Otherwise, we cannot continue. If you want to pray 5 times a day, you have to go and make wudu and prepare yourself and so forth. So, Jazakallah khair, what he mentioned was excellent.
So basically what we covered is really the wisdom behind fasting according to a lot of different scholarly opinions, and its special status according to this hadith Qudsi. What we'd really like to turn to now is the virtues and benefits behind fasting. And obviously we mentioned several times before that taqwa is specifically and literally mentioned in the Quran, in the ayah. And Talq ibn Habib mentioned that if you have trials and tribulations, fitna, then you should extinguish it with taqwa. And so he was asked, what does taqwa mean? And he replied, it means that you act in obedience based upon a light faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seeking His mercy, fearing Him, as well as refraining from disobedience. So any act, really, any deed, has a starting point and a goal. So the starting point for act in Islam needs to be iman, needs to be the faith. And the goal, so if your starting point is iman, it's based on sincerity. It should not be based on habits, on whims or desires. Then the goal or the target is the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not anyone else. And this is what really makes the act acceptable in Islam. And as was mentioned in the hadith via Ahmad, الصوم جنة يستجير بها العبد من النار, that fasting is a shield that the worshipper uses to protect himself from the hellfire.
I just want to comment on this taqwa thing. Taqwa is like, as you said, it's a shield, a protection from falling into bad things. But how you acquire the taqwa? By obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah says in the verse of the fasting, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. The purpose of siyam, to gain taqwa, piety, and pious and righteousness and so forth. And I will maybe mention what some of the scholars, early generation of Muslims like Ali radiallahu anhu, when he was asked about taqwa, what does it mean? He said, الخوف من الجليل والعمل بالتنزيل والرضا بالقليل والاستعداد ليوم الرحيل. Ali radiallahu anhu, may Allah be pleased with him, when he was asked about taqwa, he said, in the closest meaning what he said, you follow the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You fulfill the duties on the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then you be content, accept what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you in this life. And the fourth thing he mentioned, you work hard in this dunya to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to gain more good deeds so that you face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with high pious situation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran mentioned in the verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, يا أيها الناس اعبدوا ربكم الذي خلقكم والذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking to mankind, not just the Muslim, to mankind. Worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the one who created you, so that you and the one who before you, so that you gain piety, you gain taqwa. So taqwa is very important concept in Islam and a protection and fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakallah khair. And clearly during Ramadan, when people have a lot of good deeds that are done throughout the day and throughout the month, and it's sustained for a long time, this helps people get steady and get them in the right level and to focus on monitoring themselves and feeling with the presence of Allah and feeling their own accounts and their own deeds.
Yes.
Jazakallah khair. So to wrap up this episode, we discussed initially the wisdom behind fasting, what's been mentioned in the Quran, what some of the scholars have mentioned about the wisdom of fasting, as well as the hadith in which Allah said that fasting is for Him and that He is the one that rewards for it. And we started to discuss some of the virtues and benefits. We started with taqwa, piety or consciousness of Allah, and protecting oneself from Allah's wrath and seeking His mercy. And inshallah we'll continue in the next episode with some of the other benefits and virtues and wisdoms. See you inshallah.